Okay, we go straight to the question and answer session. So everyone have a question, please raise your hand and ask Professor directly.
Thank you, Farid. I think we really must be very thankful to Ibnu Khaldun and for your book, because he really has taught us the value of using correct in terms of societal norms of that time, and then make interpretations. My question is, for you to be able to do that or wanting to do that, you must have used akal. But isn't it true also that many of our alim ulama discourage us from using akal, and they feel that religion, Islam, is not to be reasoned, is not to be rationalized, just take the gospel or the scriptures as they are. So that's my worry about this. Where is the role of akal here? And when I read about Ibn Khaldun in relation to that, he was a very pure Ash'arite, and he was against the Mutazilite, no? Whereas that is the basis of being a Mutazilite, if my understanding is right, that the Mutazilite really use akal, and yet, you know, so I see there's some discordance between what he
you feel there's a contradiction, perhaps?
Yeah, some contradiction. Yeah. So can you just elaborate on that?
I don't think there's a contradiction, because the problem between the Mu'tazilites and the Ash'arites, and that's related to the role of rationality, is actually confined to theological and metaphysical issues. It has to do, it is not that the Mu'tazilites promote reason and the Ash'arites are against reason, right? But they disagree about the role of reason in solving or understanding certain metaphysical theological issues, right? No, so if a particular group, any group in Islam, says that you can't arrive at belief in God through reason alone, revelation is necessary, right? Now that doesn't mean, it might appear that they are critical of reason, but they are critical of reason, or they suggest that reason is insufficient as a faculty for this particular purpose. But they're not saying that reason is unimportant, or they don't relegate reason when it comes to jurisprudence, when it comes to the study of history, when it comes to kingship, or the study of social issues or economy and so on and so forth. They don't do that. And in fact, the Ash'arites do not do that. Right? Many of the great, you will not find distinctions in scientific abilities of Muslim scholars based on whether they were Mu'tazilites or Ash'arites or Imami Shi'ites or Ismailis. It doesn't work that way, right? Similarly, people often say that if you follow Al-Ghazali, you cannot be scientific because Al-Ghazali was against causality. But that's a very naive idea, because Al-Ghazali never said that if you put your hand in over a flame, a burning flame in a fire, that there's no cause and effect, that your hand would not burn. He's not saying that, right? I suppose they are saying that at a metaphysical level.
Metaphor, it's more metaphor.
No, it's not that. It's that I think what their view was that there's no cause and effect, in the sense that there's no impersonal law that makes things happen. Rather, it is God. Because if you say there's an impersonal law, then you're saying that God is not part of the equation. They're saying it's actually God doing it every time, in a sense, right? God's continuous activity, which appears to us to be cause and effect, right? But they would never say, and somebody who believes in this doctrine of causality, they would never say, well then, don't stand in front of a moving train. It's okay to stand in front of a moving train because it may not hit you, because there's no cause and effect. They will not say that. They understand that to us, things appear in a regular, law-like fashion. So we really need to understand the doctrines carefully, otherwise we come up with very naive conclusions. So I think there isn't actually the contradiction between Ash'arites and Mu'tazilites would exist when it comes to metaphysical and theological doctrines, but it doesn't translate into.
Without looking at the, you must understand the details, like what you said.
So to put it like in simple terms, if today, let's say Dr. Farooq, if we suspect that he's Mu'tazilite, now in the days when Dr. Farooq was Ash'arite, when he does an operation, right, or when he diagnoses a patient, he's not going to be different. An Ash'arite or a Hindu, right, medical doctor is not going to give a different diagnosis because they're using a different logic or a different rationality. So the differences in your understanding of reason or rationality at a metaphysical level, at a theological level, doesn't translate into differences when it comes to actually looking at the empirical world.
That's a very, very good analogy. It doesn't make a difference. Now going back to the yes.
I think, sorry, Prof. Just my comments on what you said just now. You see, the issue was with Al-Ghazali, and you can find it in his book, Tahafut al-Falsafah, and I think Akili, was it the Innovations of the Tahafut al-Falsafah and the Tahafut as well, Ibnu Rushd. So he said, it was widely quoted everywhere that, he did not really say what you meant. It was true that, I mean, if you put in your hands, it didn't say that it will burn or anything like that. He didn't say that. Like what he was saying was that if you put a flame to a cotton, right, then the cotton burns. The cotton burns is not because of flame, because God burned the cotton.
Yes.
God burned the cotton either directly by himself or through his malaika, through his angels. Meaning to say, he was denying what we call
cause and effect,
causality or occasionalism, we call it occasionalism. Meaning to say that, to me, that's the basis where, there is no more scientific reasoning. It's the death of science, of Islamic science. Because if you deny this cause and effect,
you can't do science.
You can't understand. If you put everything to God, it's God who caused the cotton to burn. It's God that caused something. It's God that caused this thing to drop when I drop it. It's not gravity. That's the end of science. We cannot discover gravity because then everything is gone. That's my comment.
Okay, but
if you allow me to be a little cheeky at this point in time, it's just like the UMNO guy who said recently harga naik disebabkan Allah Ta'ala yang menentukan harga barang.
First of all, I don't think that the Muslims who subscribe to Al-Ghazali's doctrine of what they call occasionalism see it that way. I don't think Al-Ghazali himself saw it. So, in other words, that's why I'm making a distinction between the metaphysical level and the empirical world. That Al-Ghazali would say, as you said, that every time you do something, every time you put fire to cotton, it will burn. But don't think it is a cause and effect. Rather, it is the action of God, because God is continuously active in the world. But the point is, a Muslim who accepts that doctrine, knowingly or unconsciously, thinks of whatever's happening in the world in terms of cause and effect. They actually think of it as cause. Al-Ghazali himself, I'm sure, he understands that it appears to him and it appears to us as cause and effect. I mean, I think of this every time I fly. When the plane is taking off, I'm saying, is this like cause and effect, or is this God doing? Because if it's God doing it, then what about if this time he doesn't do it? And the plane, then the law of, what do you call the law of?
Buoyancy.
Huh?
Buoyancy.
Is it? Yeah. whatever laws that govern, the lifting of the plane above the ground when it reaches a certain speed, right? If God does decide not to do it this time, then I'm in trouble. But so there's a distinction between the atomic level, the metaphysical level. In fact, even scientists nowadays say that at the subatomic level, things don't happen the same way that as it happens, at the empirical level. I mean, at the level of what we observe with our eyes. I don't think any of the physicians that that were influenced by Al-Ghazali, therefore stopped thinking about the role, stopped thinking about contagion, about how a certain disease may appear because of the presence of mice, of rats, right? Because they had already known some centuries before the Europeans that diseases could be spread from one individual to another. I don't think that after being influenced by Al-Ghazali's ideas that they stopped traveling by ship because they no longer see a cause and effect relationship between the wind and the sail and moving in the sea.
But my comment is that it has a profound effect in a way that if we believe that the actual cause is God's deed,
Yeah.
God wanted it to be that way.
Yeah.
It's not because of the natural laws that God created.
Yeah.
Laws of gravity, all the other laws.
Yeah.
Okay, in this world, the natural laws.
Yeah.
It has a profound effect in a way that, then people will believe, as in the Malay communities nowadays,
Yeah.
believe that a man can travel from one part or be at two different parts in the world at the same time.
Yeah.
Because God is capable of doing that. Because everything is God's will.
Yeah.
If God's willing, then a person could perform what we call a spiritual kind of surgery and remove some gallbladder stones.
Yeah.
So these are kind of ramifications and the problems that has been created by this kind of doctrine.
I agree, but the reverse is also problematic, because if we say that there are laws rather than God's continuous actions, rather there are laws of gravity, laws of thermodynamics, and so on and so forth, then are you saying that therefore God cannot do these things, like make somebody appear, somebody who is attending Friday prayer in Kuala Lumpur is able to read the dua at the end of the Friday prayer in Makkah. Are you saying that God cannot do that? Or are you saying that He can but He won't?
What I'm saying is that I think there's a difference between you and me, our ideas.
Yeah.
Is it because I think you believe in that possibility to happen?
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. See, what I'm saying is this. What I'm saying is that what we express as God's continuous action in the world, what the occasionalists say, appears to us to be law-like regularities, and to me they are the same thing. That from God's, if we can say from God's perspective, He is continuously doing, continuously active, right? And it is so perfect and so regular, it appears to us, as we formulate it, as a law. So I don't see there two different things. God doing something all the time, like making the cotton burn, or, it's either that or it's a law that we, a law that we have in physics that explains the burning, which we translate into, cause and effect. I see them as the same thing. I don't see them as one or the other. I don't really quite understand how they can be one or the other. What is God's continuous activity appears to us to be law, because it is so regular that anytime you put cotton on the flame, even if you're believing it's God doing it all the time, He does it every single time. So it's a law. I don't see the distinction.
My take on that is that God created natural laws. He was created by natural laws, and He's bound to follow the natural laws. Meaning to say that He created gravity on this earth.
Yeah.
So He's bound to follow gravity. Everything is bound to follow gravity. And if we understand that gravity is part of God's laws,
Yes.
Meaning to say then science and scientific progress can prosper.
But you
we
see
can
that
get scientific progress. If you deny that, you see all this what they call because God is bound to these natural laws that He created. The natural laws did not form on its own.
on its own, yes.
It was created by God.
Okay, so now the problem becomes now you have two possible perspectives, right? God created the natural law and then set back and let the natural law take its course, right? Or God created the natural law in the sense that He is continuously doing and acting, right? Now, to me, we are looking at God in human terms, right? When you say God created the natural law, it means He created it, however He creates it, and then after He creates it, He leaves it. Just like, human beings, we create a machine, we turn it on, and the machine is self-generating, self-running, right? But clearly we cannot understand God in human terms. All we can say is that there are things that are happening in the universe that have regularity. We call them laws. Now, how actually these laws came into place, how God created them, is God continuously working on them, or did He create them and then let them run? And so, it's impossible for us to say. All we can say is that there are what we consider to be laws, and that they are perfect, they are self-generating, so we can establish science. And whatever theory we use to explain the existence of this regularity, Al-Ghazali would agree with us that there is regularity, but he don't call it cause and effect, right? You and I will call it cause and effect. And we will all have different views about how that cause and effect came, how that regularity came into existence. Al-Ghazali has a different theory about that regularity. Those who say it's cause and effect, they talk about that regularity in terms of laws. But we can all agree that there is that regularity. We can all agree that whenever you put fire on the cotton, the cotton will burn. And we will all react to the fire in the same way, whether it is Al-Ghazali who says there is no causality, or it is us who says there is causality, or whether you believe God is continuously simply acting to make the cotton burn, or whether you believe that He created a law and then that law runs on its own. We are all going to behave in the same way towards the flame. We all are going to pull our hand away when we approach a fire.
I believe this law will not change because there's a verse in the Quran, فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا.
Yeah.
Means that, whatever the sunnah of the Prophet, the sunnah of the God, or natural laws created by God, there will be no change.
So that's a different question. I also believe that. In other words, that regularity, however the regularity comes about and however we explain it, you believe that that regularity is fixed, right? And others, then there would be others who don't agree with Al-Ghazali about having no cause and effect. They may agree with you that there is a law, but they will believe God can suspend the law. Miracles, they will say there are miracles, right? So believing that it's possible for things to happen outside of the law can even people who do not accept Al-Ghazali's theory of occasionalism, they may still believe that God does suspend the laws. So in other words, you may not be a follower of Al-Ghazali, you may believe in cause and effect, but you believe that God may change His mind. God has the ability to suspend the law. You can still think unscientifically. Many people think unscientifically even though they believe in cause and effect. And their whole lives are organized around the belief in cause and effect. When they are sick, they go to the doctor. When they have diabetes, they believe that certain medication improves their insulin production and so on and so forth. They believe that, right? But at the same time, they will believe that miracles are possible. There's possibility that God suspends His own laws. That maybe through a miracle, through enough of dua, maybe I will recover from a certain illness without the medication or something like that.
Khaldun is saying that he is able to discover historical truth because he received some kind of doesn't call it secret knowledge or something like that, like a lesser degree of prophetic revelation, something like that. So my question would be that, did he mean to say that you can't determine historical truth without receiving that?
No. I think, like, you know, as is the case with many Muslims, he believed in the possibility of receiving of ilham, you know, of some kind of intuition or experience, but intuition or inspiration. But to him, the science of human society is entirely a rational process. It's something that you can study, you can acquire, skill and ability you can acquire. And he was critical of the historians during his time and before him, who did not apply logic, did not apply various methods, demonstration, deduction, to the study of history, and therefore were not able to make a distinction between true and false reports. And in fact, he referred to, in Rosenthal's translation, Ibn Khaldun refers to the pasture of stupidity of the historians, you know, that they're all grazing in a pasture of stupidity. In the Arabic it says al-mar'a al-jahil bain al-anam wakhimun wabilun. Mar'a al-jahil is the pasture, you know where animals graze. Jahil means, you know, kajahilan, right? Jahiliya, the people who are jahil, they are all like, you know, when you imagine cows eating grass, right? So these people are, in other words, grazing in the pasture of stupidity. So he was very critical and made fun of these historians. Now his response to them was not to receive ilham, but rather is to think in a logical way, to understand the essence, the nature of society. Then you can know whether what is reported as having happened in history, could it really have happened the way it was reported, or should there be alternative interpretations of what happened. So it's clearly, you know, he clearly has a rational approach.
Can I go back to that, what Ibn Khaldun said, the use of logic, the use of knowing history and society to separate truth and untruth? You have given very good examples of the Bani Qurayza and Abdullah Sabah, and I'm convinced that, you know, you have convinced me that I have to look at these two events in a more critical way. What was the truth? A lot of it was untrue. What is your opinion, and this is quite challenging for you, which I always have difficulty in talking to this with my Christian friends. Like they say, okay, you believe your scripture is the truth. I believe my scripture is the truth. And both of us believe we are right. And this is mainly on the crucifixion of Jesus. That we Muslims, we say that God, Allah, took Jesus bodily to heaven, even on the Mount of Olives itself, before he even went on the road to Golgotha, on that what they call now Via Dolorosa. Whereas they believe it was Jesus who was crucified. When you look at the Quranic verse, it doesn't say siapa yang menggantikan Nabi Isa, itu kan, it is silent.
Yeah.
But is it true that we Muslims, we tend to believe what most historians say, it was actually Judas Iscariot? What is your personal...
That's their theory.
So we
Islam
cannot establish the truth.
No, Islam has nothing to say about that. I mean, when you say Islam, mean the Quran or the...
The Quran doesn't say, remain
No.
silent.
Yeah.
But all you know, even my ustad and all that, they say, yeah, it is Judas because that's what historians say. And I looked back at the Gospel of Barnabas.
Which historian? Is it the Christian historians themselves? Some
No,
of them.
the very famous Al-Kathir, is it? That Muslims used to...
I know, but among the Christian scholars, there are so many
Christian scholars will say that my scripture said it was Jesus who went on the cross.
There are Christian scholars who say that, but there is so much reinterpretation and revisionist or revisionary history among Christian scholars and Western scholars who may not necessarily be religious, but even among the religious ones, there are so many views among them in terms of, you know, revising history, and the Muslims do not know that literature. We have no business to make comments about these things by simply having a dogmatic approach. There are ideas that, there's certain ideas that took root among the early Muslims, and they were handed down from generation to generation. The idea that that Eve is made from Adam's rib, it's not part of Islamic, it's become part of Islamic tradition because we accepted it, right?
Yeah.
But there's no basis for it.
Yeah.
So they are what they call Israel.
But Nabi Isa tu, because there is a clear verse, you know,
Yeah.
in the Surah Al-Baqarah,
Right.
mengatakan that, you know, he was never on the cross. But anyway, so my point is, it can be quite relative, you know.
Yeah.
How do you assess historical
Yeah.
event, whether it was fiction, whether it was truth? So
Yeah.
as a good Muslim, I just say what the Quran tells me, that is my truth. But I stand by my point that I still do not know who went to the cross.
That's right.
Because the name Judas was never mentioned in the Quran. You said
Yeah.
somebody else.
That's right.
It could be anybody
Yeah,
else.
and I don't know if people want to get into get into it in more detail and to answer the question. Obviously, as a Muslim, you would have to become an expert on the history of Christianity, which means knowing the Christian sources, knowing what they know, right? You can't just simply go by some of the early Islamic sources and then decide that based on hearsay that it was, whoever they say it was. But this is our lacking in scholarship because we generally have no expertise on Christianity and Judaism and other religions. Generally we don't, right? Unlike the Europeans who actually have expertise on Islam
And to make it worse, Farid, we are discouraged from having discourses on
That's right.
this. Like you even have to keep this address a secret. It's just the environment doesn't allow us, so that's very frustrating.
That's right.
You cannot, discuss and exchange ideas with other people. I have another comment actually, but
Yeah, come.
I don't like other people to take so much of.
Listen.
Yeah, may I just comment?
We can come
a bit
back.
from the questions, but quickly which relates about prophecy and how do we understand truth and historical truth. What is fascinating for me reading Ibn Khaldun, at least the earlier pages of the Muqaddimah translated by Rosenthal, is he in a way explained prophecy in a human and scientific way, which is in general, I would say Muslims usually understand prophecy just as Nabi terima wahyu and then blah blah blah. We don't really understand it or try to consider it from a psychological, from a social psychological perspective, which in a way Ibn Khaldun has explained it. And for me, I really appreciate that part. And it also helps us in understanding how does religious spirituality or Islamic spirituality as well relates to our other doctrinal matters and relates to our other aspects in our social life. But my main question that I would like to ask Prof is that mainly we know that, as you mentioned, the focus of Ibn Khaldun's work, at least the part which I've already read, is his emphasis on, as you said, the rise and fall of dynasties, which in I think at the current time now we would term it more as either traditional or like primitive civilization. Compared to our current world now, basically in the time of modernity, we are associated more to democracy, multiculturalism, advanced economic trading, all these kind of things. And Khaldun emphasized a lot on the importance of, I think the term is asabiyah, which is in Rosenthal's translation, is group feeling, which he used. The rise and fall mainly depends on this thing which we call the group feeling, very strong sense
They
of
call it societal cohesion.
Societal cohesion. Okay, this is the part which I would relate to. Also an important sociological figure, but in the Western scholarship, which is the kind, which I see some kind of similarity on how Khaldun explains about Asabiyah with the concept of the collective conscience of the kind in the mechanical solidarity. The thing is that the kind explain the process. There is a process on how civilization evolved. At least he used the mechanical solidarity part towards the organic solidarity part, which he said that at the earlier phase, civilization and society is strong based on the mechanical solidarity, the collective conscience, but in modern societies, good society cannot rely on that anymore. They need to rely more on the exchange, the division of labor, and all the modern constructions. So this would relate to the importance of Khaldun at the current time now. How does that relate to this setting? Democracy, very complex society, very complex modern society.
I don't think Ibn Khaldun is relevant at that level, because his Asabiya is a kind of social solidarity based on kinship, nasab. So he discusses three levels. The strongest form of solidarity is based on blood ties, nasab. And then you have hilf and wala, which is alliance and clientship. So if Ibn Khaldun was living today, he would say that in many societies, including his own society, solidarity is less based on kinship and more on alliances and clientelism, right? But alliances and clientelism between people who don't have strong kinship bonds is a weaker form of solidarity, and open to, it's more brittle. It can easily be disrupted. And in fact, in his logic of state formation, after some generations, the kinship element, a ruling dynasty, in a ruling dynasty, the kinship element becomes weaker, the blood element becomes weaker, because when a ruler becomes a ruler, a tribal chief has the support of all his kinsmen. They establish a dynasty with the help of his kinsmen. Then he becomes the sultan, becomes the ruler. Once he becomes a ruler, he doesn't want all his kinsmen around him, because they will want to take the throne away from him. So he distances himself from them. Gradually, he becomes surrounded by people with whom he has alliances, but not from the same family, not from his family. And sometimes they even take foreigners, like they rely on people from a different religion or different ethnic group, because they don't have legitimacy to claim the throne. So it's safer to rely on them. For example, in Iran, in the Safavid times, there was a lot of reliance on Armenian traders. Because if Armenians are a strong trading class, they can't exert political influence because they're not Muslims. They're not Persians, they're not Muslims. Right? Similarly, in Malaysia, it's possible to argue that the Chinese, it's safe to rely to have and to allow for the development of a strong Chinese capitalist class, because they can't be a threat to you, to the Malay rulers, to the Malay ruling class, because they don't have any political legitimacy. They cannot become prime minister and that kind of thing, right? But Malay politicians would be afraid of a strong Malay capitalist class. Because when you have a strong Malay, if you have a powerful Malay capitalist class, they can dictate politics, right? So this is basically the idea. So these three terms, nasab, alliance, and clientelism, are, I think, what make up Asabiya. To the extent that Asabiya is more, to the extent that blood ties are the preponderant aspect in Asabiya, Asabiya is stronger. But if blood ties are weak, it's more alliances and clientelism. That Asabiya is weaker and more prone to being broken up by interference from the outside. So we can relate Ibn Khaldun at that level, right? And the other thing is his sociological thinking, that Islamic revival, or the Muslim revival, kebangkitan Islam, in the Muslim community, is not simply a spiritual matter. It's not a psychological matter. it's also a matter of entire social groups, right? So if we want to apply a Khaldunian framework, we would want to look at what social groups are involved. For example, we have a problem of ulama in Malaysia being very backward. Why is that the case? So if we were to look at it from a Khaldunian perspective, we want to look at what are the social groups that they originate from. What kind of education, not just what kind of education they got formally, but what is the home atmosphere, what is the society, the communities in which they grew up with, that predisposes them to having such backward and conservative ideas. In other words, there's a social, angle to understanding. And also Ibn Khaldun has a long discussion on education, on learning, and the correct kind of procedures for learning. It would be interesting to look at our education system and the religious education system to see whether, to what extent it deviates from what Ibn Khaldun regarded as the model for religious education.
So while blood is generally thicker than water, in fact, because blood is thicker than water, rulers tend to kill each other. I think the best example would be Aurangzeb. He killed, after Shah Jahan died, Aurangzeb killed all, even before his father died. He killed off all his brothers. So you said, no, because your family will have right to the throne. So they will go for alliances, even taking in foreigners rather than their own family. And I think even in Iran, one of the Qajar kings killed off all his brothers as well. I can't remember which Qajar king.
This happened in many cases. In the Ottomans did it routinely. It was a rule. It was required. They were obliged to kill the contenders. To kill when they ascended the throne. They were obliged to kill their brothers for the sake of the stability of the empire. Yeah, that's why I'm very suspicious when people talk about how great these Islamic empires were, because they were great empires, but in many cases they were hardly Islamic, right? But again, we have this thing of idealizing the
That's
past.
one of the weaknesses of Melayu Islam.
Yeah.
Idealize the history of Islamic rulers when it was a horrendous, bloody history.
That's right.
A lot of sins were committed. I had one comment, but your comment on that Ibn Khaldun take on prophecy, I know so little about Ibn Khaldun. I've not read him at all, but at least about the prophecy, I have no idea at all. But I came across something which I told Farouk on my WhatsApp message, that he was he said something about, let's not go into that now, about the theory of evolution. Some people said he prophesied the theory of evolution, what Charles Darwin said. But when I wanted to find more information on that, I don't find any more, and I'm very confused, so I will not harass you with that question. My comment that I wanted to make was what you said earlier on. We Muslims, especially Malay Muslims, we have such an inborn, inherent hatred for the Jews. Personally, Farid, for me, my anger and hatred for the Jews does not go back to those theological ancient history. What happened in Medina, what was written in the Charter, to me that is, like you said, some were historical, some are not historical. What the Prophet did or what they did to the Prophet, to me it has not that much bearing on my life today, and I don't hate the Jews for that. And I've got so many good Jewish friends, very, very good ones. But don't you think it is right for me, especially what's happening in Jerusalem today, that it is right for us, more right rather for people like us to really hate or get angry with the Jews for more recent histories? What Rothschild did, Lord Balfour did in 1917, what happened in 1948 when they used the Holocaust as an excuse, and what happened in the 6-Day War, has such painful memories for us. And I don't look upon this as a Muslim because I'm a Muslim and they did this to my fellow Muslims. Even if the Arabs and Palestinians were not Muslims, I would still think it was very wrong for the English and Lord Rothschild to bring in the Zionists and steal people's land and make it a state of Israel. So I'm not even looking at it religiously that way.
But they are not. It's not the Jews. It's not the
it's
Jews.
a Zionist. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, it's just like when Muslims do bad things, we get angry when people blame the Muslims, right? You're supposed to blame certain groups,
Like
terrorists,
ISIS.
or you know, a certain organization, or certain extremist groups, and we're not doing the same when it comes to the Jews.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm saying. And if these myths, like the myth of the massacre of Bani Qurayza, they are misused by certain Muslims.
Yeah, because it serves their purpose.
It serves their purpose. And they also reinforce stereotypes about Muslims among non-Muslims. In fact, the famous Orientalist, Montgomery Watt, he himself, when in referring to the story of the Bani Qurayza, he said, well, that's something to the effect that that's the morality of the Muslims. You see? So that story is being understood by him to confirm, you know, their views about what Muslims are about. The Muslims, you know, the moral stance of Muslims.
But I think the most dangerous myth, and I still get it from my own friends, so-called educated people, who says that the main aim of any Shia is just to kill a Sunni. I mean, it's not even a myth, it's just a total lie that people, you know, and this goes on, it gets viral. And among my friends, they believe that.
Yeah.
That it is the
Who said
creed
that?
of the Shia.
Who said that?
My friends.
Huh?
My friends, yeah.
Well, then the Shias will be very stupid because they've hardly killed any Sunni. They're not able to, apparently. Most of the Sunnis are killed by fellow Sunnis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at...
All the terrorist group has
yes.
always been Sunni, not
Yeah.
a single talk of them is Shia.
That's right.
So these are kind of some dangerous myths that people like us in this room today, what can we do to undo this myth among orang Melayu ni lah? You know,
Yeah.
the anti-Shia feeling is...
I think
It's
it has
just
to
so
start from
evil.
the clerics.
Yeah.
But now the problem is that even moderate clerics, so-called moderate clerics, enlightened moderate clerics,
Yeah.
they believe in such
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
In fact, they were propagating such myth.
Yeah. That's
Right.
right. Yeah.
So that's the issue. And now, like even when Saudi Arabia came out and said that this King Salman said that, you know, we are with the Israelis against the Palestinians,
Yeah.
they didn't say a thing.
That's right.
Didn't say a word about it.
Yes, exactly. That there's only one group that can change the religious leadership, but we don't know whether there will come a time when they will really act. It's the rulers, right? The rulers have the constitutional right to change, to guide in a very fundamental manner the religious leadership in this country, not the politicians. But
We
we've
will
seen
never
some,
get an answer to the question, why are they not doing it?
yeah.
There's no answer.
But I think one of the things that we should do, you know, I think what we are doing is we're engaging in intellectual and other kinds of activism, propagating ideas, organizing talks and lectures, spreading things on social media, which is important. But I think we need to also engage in this battle at another level, which is to urge the rulers. There has to be pressure from the Rakyat to the rulers, saying to them that we need you to save Islam in Malaysia. Basically, that's what it's come down to, right? We didn't take the rulers seriously before.
But there
in
is
the
no
60s and
such
70s.
pressure. That pressure
There
is
isn't
not
such
being
pressure.
created.
Yeah.
It's not being created.
It's not being created. It's up to us. It's up to us. I think the question of the role of the ruler is not questioning the status of the rulers, right? I mean, we firmly believe in
In fact, they're strengthening.
in the institution, and it's
But
according to our constitution. But you're right. We want the rulers to
Yes.
play the role that is given to them by the constitution. We want them to be more active in that.
To use the power that they have.
But they need to. The rulers need to know that the Rakyat is behind them.
If I'm reading Ibnu Khaldun correctly, from what he wrote, you don't really need religion to become civilized, pious.
Mm.
For example, we can see Rome or Greece, right? And then because of that, my question to you is that are we too overemphasizing religion, or to become a greater nation, a greater society, or what's your take on this?
No, I don't think it's a matter of overemphasizing or underemphasizing religion. It's a matter of overemphasizing form rather than content. Clearly, the spiritual and the moral values of any religion are important. If whether you talk about our daily lives, whether you talk about our lives in a community, or you talk about political life, the moral and spiritual values of any religion are important because they act as a compass, and they act as as a gauge, and they help to keep humanity on track. It's very important. The problem is not that we are overemphasizing religion. The problem is that we are emphasizing religious identity, and we're emphasizing form, legalism, rules, right? And the problem is that all this is happening in an authoritarian context. The people in charge of religion have an authoritarian approach, perhaps also an authoritarian personalities. That is the problem. So it's not religion versus non-religion. The same thing happens exactly in secular environments. You have authoritarian personalities, you have authoritarian rule with appeal to non-religious ideologies. This has happened with the communists, it has happened with the fascists. There's no appeal to religion. It has happened with, in a sense, with Democrats. Now, if you look at the authoritarian tendency in the US under Trump, right? You see that happening as well. So it's not religion versus non-religion. I would say it is whether you are religious or not, whether you appeal to religion or not, what I want to see is, do you have a humanistic, egalitarian tendency, or do you have an authoritarian, totalitarian tendency, whether you are religious or not. Now, if we talk in more specific terms about the Malay world, our tradition now, which is dominating in the Malay world, is a feudalistic tradition. It is, the problem is not Islam, the problem is that the ulama, the religious scholars, and those who use Islam among the politicians are doing so through a feudalistic understanding, a feudalistic attitude, emphasizing hierarchy, emphasizing an authoritarian approach, emphasizing, for example, no discussion. What I say is right, you listen to us. And of course they are talking about Islam in this mode, right? In the Malay world, going back to pre-colonial times, you have that approach among the rulers, among the religious scholars. But you also have an egalitarian approach, also using Islam. The Taj Salatin, for example, which was a work said to have been written at the beginning of the 18th century, is it? Or beginning of the 17th century, 1603 or something like that, right? By Bukhari Jauhari. That's an Islamic work appealing to Islam, but emphasizing an egalitarian approach. This Taj Salatin is advice to the kings, advice to the sultans, emphasizing, for example, the sultan has to consider himself below the law, not above the law, emphasizing that the sultan should behave towards his rulers in a way that he would want people to behave towards him. It's full of this kind of advice. So if Bukhari Jauhari was alive, no, I don't want to say that. Bukhari Jauhari would
What was
not.
the book again called?
Well, if Bukhari Jauhari was alive in the time of the Bani Umayyad,
Oh,
It's called
well, then-
Taju Salatin. I can send you some information about it. If he was alive in the time of the Bani Umayyad, he would be criticizing the Bani Umayyad for having a feudalistic approach and for not adhering to the the moral codes of Islam when it comes to practicing kingship. Right? So in the Malay world, we have this kind of tradition, but so you have in the interpretation of Islam and in the way we live as Muslims, you have the egalitarian tradition and you have the feudalistic tradition. But the feudalistic tradition is the one that dominates. And it survived into the post-colonial period, partly because the British supported the feudalistic tradition. The British propped up the Malay rulers. What was taught, what was emphasized in the way the British taught Malay studies, in the way the British, the kind of studies that they promoted in Malay literature, they promoted a more feudalistic understanding of the Malay works, all the hikayat and the sejarah Melayu and all these things. And we have inherited that, and we emphasize that, right? But we could easily have gone the other way. Imagine if Taju Salatin is discussed by the ulama in the khutbah Jum'at. The ulama talk about the Taju Salatin, the work of Islam from the Malay world, emphasizing egalitarianism, emphasizing just rulership, and so on and so forth. Then our political culture will be different, right? So I think we need to go more into these aspects.
Yeah. I can agree with you more, Farid, on what you said, more form than content. In fact, Farid, I've been cracking my head, if on G25 will get the opportunity to debate with extreme. This is one of the points I'd like to raise. Some people are looking at form rather than content, and worse still, they're looking at trivialities rather than the major things that matter in our life. So they were saying something like, okay, I won't mention the hijab, like hijab is major enough. There are many trivialities, should you wudu first before you read the Quran, or should you not? Rather than looking at the major things in life like kleptocracy. Has any alim ulama criticized kleptocracy in this country? So I think these are the things that really beset the Malays, Muslims in this country. Yeah. One, like you said, more form rather than content, and more trivialities. And you also mentioned about the values rather than religiosity itself. In fact, Farouk, on the Monday roundtable with Nadir Hashimi, when I was asked to give the welcoming address, I thought it was very interesting that your title is religiosity and authoritarianism, and not religion and authoritarianism. So it is not Islam that is authoritarian. It is people who want to be so-called, appear to be religious. People like it seems. So that brings me back to that study that many people don't like me when I quote this study, because it was done by a Muslim scholar, no? About ranking of how Islamic governance of countries are.
Yeah.
Malaysia is number Askari. Malaysia number 38 kan? Saudi Arabia 100 lebih. And the first one is what? New Zealand, Iceland, Finland. Because how they govern their countries is really following Quranic principles. And yet countries like ours, we are not.
Yeah, we have reached a situation where Islam needs to be saved from the Muslims.
Yeah, exactly.
Prof, I would like to get your comment. Also relates to Sean's question on the role of religions in society. But this one is particularly Ibnu Khaldun's comment on mainly theology. I recall reading your book, there is one section in which Ibnu Khaldun was, I would put it as very highly critical towards Sufism, which is he was really harsh in his comments.
Yeah.
Relates to like being crazy people or things like that. That is one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, reading Ibnu Khaldun's Muqaddimah as well, he was also critical to the reformists. I'm just reading one phrase here briefly. If someone who is on the right path were to attempt religious reforms in this way, his isolation would keep him from gaining the support of the group feeling, the Asabiyah, and he would perish. If someone merely pretends to achieve religious reform in order to gain political leadership, he deserves to be hampered by obstacles to fall victim to perdition. Religious reforms are a divine matter that materializes only with God's pleasure and support, through sincere devotion for Him and in view of good intentions towards the Muslim. No Muslim, no person of insight could doubt this. So, what is your comment? One is on Sufism, the other side on Khaldun's view.
Yeah, but I don't think he means reform in the way we understand it. Like, for example, if Ibn Khaldun was alive today, he wouldn't say that IRF shouldn't be doing what it's doing. I would have to check the Arabic version to know what term is being used for reform, right? But it sounds like he's referring more to theological doctrines. Because in terms of societal reform, he himself was very active, right? When he was many times appointed as Qadi, as judge. And there you can see his reform mentality. He was very much against bribery and corruption.
In fact, I thought he called himself a reformist in his autobiography, didn't he? Unless it was wrongly translated. He considered himself a reformist.
The word reform was not
Okay.
very popular at that time.
Well, yeah, there was no...
The semantics,
Yeah.
a question of semantics.
You see, the term, he used the term taghir al-munkar to change to change the situation from a state of how do you say munkar? Munkar, munkar, right? Yeah. But that was not an act of an individual. It was the act of an entire society. That, I mean, it works. It goes hand in hand with this theory of state formation, that a dynasty is created. In the first generation, the ruler rules according to law. He's moral. He's upright. He follows the Sharia. In the second generation, the son follows the same way. In the third generation, the ruler becomes more attached to luxury, becomes less religious in the sense of being less moral, right? Surrounds himself with, he distances himself from his relatives because they are a threat to him. He surrounds himself with clients. He's detached from the people. He increases taxes to fund his luxurious lifestyle and the lifestyle of his clients and so on. So the empire becomes poorer. By the fourth or fifth generation, it begins to collapse, and and also in terms of religiosity, you have a lot of corruption. You have monetary corruption as well as moral corruption because of the excessive luxurious lifestyle, and on the other hand, you have poverty. So the whole thing collapses. So the taghir al-munkar happens when a religious scholar allies with tribes outside of the city who come in and establish a new dynasty. Right? Because the old dynasty is weak and crumbling and seen to be immoral, right? And people who are morally upright, they don't like that, but they don't have the military support, so they ally. So you have somebody like who claims to be a Mahdi, for example, or a sheikh, the leader of a tariqah, allies with the tribal groups outside, and these tribal groups are very strict religiously, and they see what's happening in the city as these are really immoral, debauched people. So they establish a new dynasty, and that establishment of a new dynasty is taghir al-munkar. Then it starts again, strict, religious, following Sharia, and then the cycle repeats itself. Right? So reform is actually total, it's societal for Ibn Khaldun. Reform, the term, we wouldn't use the word, I guess the term Ibn Khaldun uses is taghir, changing. Yeah, that means moving away from munkar. Yeah.
What about the views on Sufism as you been in the book?
Ibn Khaldun wrote a book on Sufism, Shifa Usail. It's just been translated, it's just appeared. He was against what we would call the drunken Sufis. Not the ones who are physically drunk. There are those kind of Sufis too, like Umar Khayyam, for example. But the ones, there is a distinction between the Sufis who kind of, what do you call it, the sober Sufis and the drunk Sufis. The ones that emphasize, the state of intoxication, as opposed to those who emphasize a more rational, a more sober approach. I think he's not against the spirituality preached by Sufism against meditation and against the morality of the Sufis. But what he's against is the claims that Sufis make about being able to achieve a state whereby they experience reality that no others can experience. I think it's more, his being against that aspect of Sufism. But a few people have gone deeply into Ibn Khaldun's writings on Sufism, and I think now there's going to be more attention because of the recent appearance of the translation. I myself am planning to write something about it, because I think it's more complicated than what I said just now. I sort of simplified it, but there are several angles to his critique of Sufism, and also to his acceptance of aspects of Sufism.
One last comment, Professor, you mentioned about there could be some misconception when it comes to the phrases during the translation of books. What's your comment? Because I heard a lot of comments that Rosenthal's translations, there's a lot of critics with his comments.
Yeah. Actually, I'm interested in this idea of the orientality of translation. That when Ibn Khaldun, for example, is translated, the translation takes place through the lens of Orientalism, right? So, for example, Hadari and Badawi is often translated as town and country because it is seen through European lens. In Europe, the principal division was between town and country. So some people translate it as town and country, and some Arabs, even writing and speaking in Arabic, think of it as town and country or urban and rural, which is not right, right? Because they are also influenced maybe by Eurocentric understanding. So you need to, when you read Ibn Khaldun, you need to read him in his own terms and understand him from the point of view of what people during his time understood. So if you look at the Arabic language lexicons, which are uninfluenced by Orientalism, it's very clear that Hadari or Hadara refers to both town and village. I've seen that myself in some of the lexicon. So when Ibn Khaldun used Hadara, he means sedentary societies which are settled. It could be towns, it could be villages. And Badawa means people who, at least for some part of the year, are moving around. There are no societies that are totally nomadic. They move around 365 days of the year. But for some portion of the year, they are moving around. Those are the Badawis, what we call the Bedouins.
Bedouins,
Yeah.
they mean the same thing, huh?
Yeah, Bedouin is it's an Arabic, comes from Arabic. Yeah, that's right. Similarly, when Ibn Khaldun talks about, he says in the Muqaddimah of the Muqaddimah, it says that his purpose is to study the Arab and Berber Jil. And that's translated as races. Again, this is, I think, an Orientalist translation, because the word Jil doesn't mean race. It means more like generations. But when you translate it as race, so Ibn Khaldun says that he's studying the Arab and Berber generation because he's actually studying generations of these groups, right? He's not making an ethnic or racial distinction between them. But when you put race, you're giving again a modern and maybe even European interpretation or understanding. And indeed, it was in line with the French view of North Africa, because they tried to reconstruct North African history as a conflict between Arab and Berbers, because that fit in with the colonial goal of divide and rule. Yeah. So that's why we have to pay a lot of attention to terminology. So I have myself looked at the French, English, Malay, Indonesian, and Persian, and now I'm trying to get a Turkish translation of Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun to see how all these terms have been translated. Yeah, the Malay translation is very problematic.
There is a Malay.
There is Malay translation.
LBB.
Yeah, that's right.
From
Oh, it's translated from Rosenthal. Rosenthal's already got problem. It's double problem then.
Yeah, the Indonesian translation is better because, for example, it translates Jil as generasi, not ras or something like that. Yeah.
I think that's the last question. Thank you very much for coming. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.